practices, practices that we consider a form of violence that are relevant to more specific countries, and we consider female genital mutilation that concerns more than 30 countries and 200 million women and girls. And we're also considering child marriage, or child early and forced marriage as a form of violence against women and girls, and this concerns more than 700 million women. So when we think about violence against women, we have physical and sexual violence, of course, but we also consider other forms of violence that concern a lot of women. So clearly here we need as a society to consider violence as a violation of human rights, but also we need to consider its impact on society as a whole and on women's economic empowerment and on economic growth in general. So as I was saying, it is a universal, okay, sorry, a universal problem. Okay, sorry. So when we consider the impact of violence against women and girls, of course, and you have this at the center of the graphic that you have on the slide, of course, there is a huge impact at individual level. We cannot neglect to consider the impact on the health, the psychological impact of violence on the women and the girls that are victims and survivors of violence. So we need to consider this individual impact. But governments, private sector, any actor in society needs to also consider what are the impact of violence against women in society and in general in the economic growth of the country. And we're all, of course, interested in seeing our communities, our societies, our countries to grow socially and economically. And we know that violence against women is a direct barrier to sustainable development, to economic growth, and to social, to the welfare of societies. So, as I was saying, of course, first, and we need to be very clear that the main impact and the key impact of violence is at the individual level, and we need to take into consideration the health and the psychological impact on the women. But we need also to collectively recognize that violence has an impact on sustainable development, on economic growth, and on social welfare of the society. So violence against women is a human rights violation, but it has serious consequences at the level of individuals, on families, on communities, and on societies. And we're going here to speak a little bit more about the impact on economic empowerment in general and on women's participation in the social, economic, and political life. So I have, and these, I'm going to stop talking to you about figures because I've given you a lot of stats to consider, but I wanted to give you a little bit more information about the impact and violence in the workplace. So we need to, as I was saying, sexual violence is a prominent aspect of women in general, but on workers' lives particularly, and women workers are victims of violence, and this needs to be taken into account. We don't have figures at international level, at global level, but we have some studies that have been conducted that can give us some ideas about how many women workers are victims and survivors of violence. So, for example, in South Africa, there was a study that was conducted that said that 77% of women reported experiencing sexual harassment at some point during their working lives. So you see, we're talking about a large majority of women victims of sexual harassment. In Ethiopia, it's even higher. 85% of women experience some form of sexual harassment at work. And according to a review of studies on sexual harassment in the EU, so this is not just one study, it's a review of various studies that were conducted in several members of the European Union, 55% of women have experienced sexual harassment at least once since the age of 15. So again, whether it is in Europe, in Ethiopia, in South Africa, and we have more studies that I could have quoted, we have studies in Asia, we have studies in Latin America, more than half of the women workers report having been at some point in their life, in their working lives, victims of sexual harassment, and sometimes victims of physical violence at work. So we need to consider that very clearly when we design economic policies, when we think about, developing a business. Sexual harassment at work is not only an issue to consider, but it concerns more than half of the women's workers. So it's very important to consider. And we know that women face increased risks of harassment and violence in particular context of work. We know that working outside the normal working hours, when women work at night, they are more likely to be victims of violence. And we know also that women working in the same place where they live, for example, if they are domestic workers, they are more exposed to violence. So these are things that need to be considered. So how do we understand the overlap between economic empowerment and violence? And there, when you're doing a presentation, I think it would be interesting, if you're talking to a class, if you're talking to a community, or if you're talking in your university, it may be interesting to ask people what they think. How do economic empowerment and violence overlap? Here today you have the slide in front of you, so you can't really play the game, but I think it's very interesting because people have ideas about why they overlap, but maybe they don't consider all the different elements of overlap. So here I've listed 5 elements that I think are very relevant, but you could list more, and it's sometimes very interesting to have this interactive conversation with your participants or with your audience, because you can build on what they think, what ideas come to their mind. The first element that I want to highlight in terms of overlap between economic empowerment of women and violence is the fact that we have clear evidence when we study the survivors of violence. Who are victims of violence? Who are these women that are victims of domestic violence, of intimate partner violence, or violence in the workplace? We see that being poor and having a low economic and social status is a factor that increases the risk of violence. I'm adding here that the major risk of being a victim of violence is being a woman. So the first reason why people are victims of violence, people in general, whether they are men or women, whether people are victims of violence, the first major factor is being a woman. So you are more likely to be a victim of violence if you're a woman than if you're a man. But among women, we know that having a low economic and social status can increase violence. So there is here an overlap. We're not saying what is the consequence of what, but there is clearly in between a low economic and social status and being a victim of violence. The second element that we can highlight in terms of overlap between economic empowerment of women and violence is the fact that the experience of violence at home, at work, in public spaces is a significant barrier to women accessing economic life and having an equal treatment in their economic life. So clearly, when you are experiencing violence, if you're experiencing violence in the workplace, or if you're experiencing violence at home, if you're a victim of domestic violence, you have an increased, you're facing a barrier to accessing your economic life. This is clear. If you're a victim of violence at home, you're less likely to be able to, create your own company or participate actively and be a productive worker because you have other problems. You're a victim of violence. Or if you're a victim of violence in your workplace, you're less likely to go on time, to work actively, to have new ideas, to be motivated to go to your work. So there is clearly here an overlap. In general, women's access to economic empowerment can increase risks of violence. So this, I'm highlighting the temporarily. This is another overlap. We know that when women access a new job market, a new job where less women used to go, they might be a victim of violence. So for example, you have a lot of professions that are male-dominated. In the army, in the police, in the construction industry, and you have many other examples where there are very few women that are working on a daily basis. When women access these jobs, often they can be temporarily victims of violence because they are new to these sectors, and because also it's really male dominated, so they are more exposed. But I'm saying temporarily because what we have seen is that the more women access these professions, the more the violence in these professions reduces. So it is something that needs to be considered. Empowering women to access new professions may expose them temporarily to violence, but we have noticed, and the evidence is showing that it doesn't last very long, because having women and having people, you know, getting more used to women accessing these professions is slowly changing the social norms. It's changing slowly changing the mentalities in a way that we can have a reduction of violence in these sectors. Another example that we can give of the overlap is that economic empowerment of women can help women leave abusive relationships. Here we're talking more about domestic violence, intimate partner violence. Women survivors or victims of violence from their husband or from their boyfriend. Often there might be a dependency, an economic dependency. Women who are victims of violence cannot leave their husband or their boyfriend because they are depending economically. If your husband is paying for you and you don't have a job, you cannot leave him because you're less likely to be able to live an independent life. But economic empowerment here, having a job, having a source of income, an independent source of income, being able to live independently, that might motivate you and enable you to take the decision to leave, and that might provide you with the means to live an independent life. So here we have a clear, not only a clear overlap or clear connection between the two, but actually economic empowerment being a solution to addressing violence. So this needs to be considered. And the last example that I want to take is that economic empowerment also contributes to change the status of women and girls in communities. Change the idea that people have of women. If you have successful women entrepreneurs, if you have women who are independent, are innovative, are successful, that changes the vision that communities have of women, and that changes their status. So people don't consider that women are a lower level of citizens. They don't consider that women are inferior to men. When communities start getting a positive idea of women, then women are less likely to be victims of violence, because we know that the root causes of violence are these social norms that condone violence, that consider that women are inferior to men. But if you address that by having, good examples, role models of women who are successful, who are independent, who are innovative, you are changing the way people see women in societies, in communities, and that can contribute to addressing violence. So these are some of the examples, but when you have your conversation with your audience, you might have more ideas and more examples that you can use to create the link between the two elements. So what I just talked to you about, this idea of the overlap between economic empowerment of women and violence against women has been clearly highlighted in the Agenda 2030 and in the Sustainable Development Goals that all member states have adopted in 2016, so 2015. So we have collectively, all the member states have recognized that violence is a barrier to economic empowerment of women, and that supporting the economic empowerment of women can be a solution to violence against women. And this is recognized in all the planning that governments all around the world are making. And we have in this Agenda 2030 the idea that we have universality, the protection of human rights, and the idea of leaving no one behind. And these three principles can be found in the plans that are being made on economic empowerment of women and on ending violence against women. I wanted to highlight this because this is not just what UN Women is saying, or what people, activists or actors in the sector are saying. This is what governments have collectively agreed. They've highlighted that these two elements need to be addressed, that women needs to be given access to economic empowerment, and that violence needs to be eliminated by 2030. So these are clear objectives of what the member states collectively agreed, what governments, and even your government, wherever you are in the world, your government has supported that plan and has approved that plan. So this is very important to flag. So what is UN Women's strategy to make sure that we can have, transformation. We can have change in these two areas. One, we're saying working across multiple levels and multiple settings. Violence against women and economic empowerment, these are complex things to address, and we need to work at all levels. We need to work at individual level. We need to change the mindsets of people. We need to change families. We need to make sure that there isn't, we eliminate domestic violence, that women are supported to work and to have access to economic empowerment. We need to change at community level. We need to change this at community level. Societies in general need to change. And again, we're talking about mentalities. And we need countries to have approaches and programs and laws and policies that support economic empowerment and that criminalize violence against women. So we need to be capable of working at multiple levels. And you at your level, you can change. And the audience that you're talking to, they can change the situation, because working on mentalities, that can happen at society level, at your, the level of your government, but that starts with individuals. So we need to all work together to address these issues. We need to have gender transformative approaches. We know that we need to have intervention that change the mindset. It's not just having a law that says violence is bad, or having a law that says women need to access the workplace or need to work in companies. You need to have approaches that are transformative of the gender roles, transformative of the stereotypes that we have, that women are inferior to men, or that a woman that is being beaten by her husband, that's a normal thing. So we need to collectively change these things. And again, going back to the first point, this change needs to happen at individual, at family, at community, at society level, and internationally with the SDGs that I mentioned before. The last element of the principle in our strategy is that interventions need to involve both men and women. And that's very connected to what I said before. We need to work with women and we need to work with men on these interventions. So in order to effectively address violence against women, through a comprehensive approach and to connect this with economic impact of women, what we think is that you need to change the laws and policies. So governments need to have policies that support the equality of men and women and that criminalizes violence against women. So that's what your government can do. What you can do is advocate for your government to change its laws, to have policies that support this. And so that's a key message that you need to highlight. What we need is to prevent violence before it happens. And so in order to do this, we need to address the root causes of violence, which are the social norms that I mentioned before. So mentalities, stereotypes about the inferiority of women. And that's something that collectively we need to change, but that's something that you need to change. You need to give this message. You need to talk to your families. You need to talk to the workplace. You need to talk to entrepreneurs. You need to talk to civil society about this. Another important point is that women, girls, men and boys at community and workplace levels need to be mobilized in favor of respectful relationships and gender equality. So that means advocating for equal pay. That means advocating for women to have the right to be entrepreneurs, to be productive workers in their companies, to be supported when they have new ideas. But that means also having workplaces and having safe public spaces for women. So that means we need to make sure that there is no violence in the workplace, no violence in the public space, no violence at home. So women, girls, men, boys, everyone needs to be mobilized on this. We need to work at education level, and that's, of course, we all understand the importance of education. We need to change mindsets. We need to address stereotypes from a young age. So we need to have educational curricula and programs that address gender equality and violence against women, and that these be integrated in formal education, that means at school, but also into non-formal education, because we know that many girls and boys sadly do not go to school. So we need to have programs that can mobilize young people, can touch children and adolescents, even if they are not going to schools, because we need to change the stereotypes. We need to address these root causes of violence and of inequality between men and women. We need to provide services. So if a woman or a girl is a victim of violence, she needs to be able to be supported and she needs to receive services. So we need to have workplaces, in workplaces and in communities, services that can be provided to survivors of violence. When I speak about services, I speak about health, because the violence has an impact on her health. But it means also police and justice, because perpetrators of violence need to be prosecuted, and we need to make sure that this is the case. And that means also social support, psychosocial support, because this has also an influence and an impact on the psychological balance of a survivor of violence. So this needs to be provided in the workplace and in communities. And then, of course, but I'm not going to speak too much about it, we need also to be able to collect data. We need to be able to identify where violence is happening more. What is the situation of women in this region compared to that region, and how can we better program? But that's more at the level of government. So data collection is also an important element. So to support these programs that I described, UN Women's approach to changing the situation, we have a set of documents that we will send to you after this presentation. But I just wanted to list them and particularly point to one. We have a prevention framework, how to prevent violence from happening, and that includes a lot of approaches on economic empowerment of women. We have handbooks to help countries have good legislations and have national action plans, strategies to address violence, and that includes a lot of elements related to economic empowerment of women. We have guidelines on how to provide services, what I just mentioned about providing services to survivors of violence so that they have access to health, police, justice, social support. And we work with other UN agencies to develop these services. And we have also some specific guidance on school-related gender-based violence, because violence happens in schools too, and teachers, ministries of education, civil society need to be able to address this specific form of violence. But what I wanted to highlight, because that's, I think, very relevant for you as students and as presenters of these issues to your community, to your school, we have some websites that provide information on a daily basis about violence. And we have this global knowledge platform to end violence against women that includes 3 different websites that provide information about what governments are doing to address violence, what the UN is doing to address violence, and what, as a practitioner, as a citizen, as an activist, you can do to prevent violence. And we have there a lot of tools, a lot of guidelines, a lot of methodologies on how to address violence. So we will send an email after the presentation with details about these things, and I really encourage you to look at this website. That's all for me, but I'm happy to answer questions if you need.
Thank you so much, Philippe. This was a very comprehensive presentation, and I already see we do have a lot of questions specifically for this presentation. I just wanted to highlight and that today this is the second webinar from the series of webinars for champions and mentors, and we're speaking today about how to make a presentation on women economic empowerment and the issues connected with the agenda. And since a lot of you expressed the interest to know more about women economic empowerment and violence against women, today we do have Philippe Lust-Bianchi, our colleague, Ending Violence Against Women section, who kindly prepared for us this presentation. And we talked about different components, and we do have several comments and questions about this, but one specific question was regarding that where our stakeholders can find more resources were about theory of change that UN Women has comprised on the agenda of ending violence against women.
So, I mean, you can, as I was saying, we have these websites that we will share with you that presents the different strategies and approaches to addressing violence. And that includes various strategies on how to mobilize a community, how to develop an advocacy campaign, how to have programs in the workplace, how to develop trainings for companies, how to develop trainings for the civil society and activists. So we have a website that is called the Virtual Knowledge Center, which is part of our knowledge exchange platform. And again, you will have the link to this website. And this presents different topics and methodologies on how to address the issue of violence against women, particularly in various sectors, and that will include the workplace, or that will include economic empowerment strategies, and gives you a how-to guide. What are the key things that you need to think? What are the key messages? What are the statistics that you should use? What are the methodologies that you should use? And that includes also, you will have as in Google, you have a search section so that you can search for tools that exist. And these are not just tools that UN Women has developed, but that's all the tools that we consider of high quality, developed by the UN, by civil society, by association, and we're trying to have them in as many languages as possible. So we have a lot of these documents that are developed in local languages, in French, in Spanish, in Russian, in Chinese, but even in more specific languages depending on the region you're coming from. So we are trying to, and we update this on a daily basis. I have a colleague who is working on this every morning, trying to get the latest tools and the latest resources.
Thank you so much, Philippe. I do know that we have many other comments and questions, and one specific, maybe a more sensitive comment about how, if a woman finds herself or a young girl in this situation, can connect. What are the agencies that she could, maybe call or go directly? And we do have countries. Because of the time and because we do have a second presentation, maybe we will not take, because I know this is a more comprehensive response requires, but we will get back at the end of the presentations. But also, if we don't succeed, please know that Philippe and his team will kindly maybe, negotiate. We will negotiate with his team, and maybe we can have a second webinar on this topic. So please, all the considerations are taken, and we will take care of all your questions and comments. And now I would propose to go to our second panelist, Anika Falth, who is a manager of UN Women's Empower Women. She is an inspiration for all of us, and she is the mover of a big team who is here as the headquarters and the regional team as well. Anna initiated consultation for this global online platform in February 2013 and brought it to its global launch during the high-level segment at the UN General Assembly in September 2013. Anna has around 20 years of experience working on women economic empowerment. So if you have questions, and definitely this is the #1 person to ask, Anna will address the majority of them. And before joining UN Women, Anna worked with UNDP, UNCTAD, and a series of other agencies of United Nations. And without any further ado, I will give the floor to Anna.
Thank you, Diana. And thank you so much, Philippe, for your presentation. It's great. It's been some time that we haven't discussed these issues of the linkages between women's economic empowerment and ending violence against women. I think we did that in 2014, leading up to the Beijing +20. So we are very excited to be working closely with Philippe and the Ending Violence Against Women section. Okay, thank you. What is women's economic empowerment? I'm going to talk a little bit about some different approaches and some different entry points, because this is a topic that is interpreted in many different ways by different people. We have, for example, the World Bank talks about empowerment as the process of increasing individuals or groups' capacity to make choices and to transform these choices into desired actions and outcomes. It's kind of very theoretical definition. So I will go and try to unpack it a little bit to see what that actually means. We look at it from different perspectives, and we look at it from the individual woman, but also as a collective. So it's not about bringing about economic empowerment only for one individual woman, but for the collective and for the group of women in society. We look at it from a rights perspective, opportunities, abilities to make choices, access training, education, jobs, and developing their capacity and skills. There are many opportunities that can be covered here, but just to give you an idea. And also it's about being able to speak up and have a voice in society, be able to contribute to decision making and to be leaders. And we have tried to picture an economy that works for women. So how would that look like? For example, women have equal access to rights and opportunities, have a good job with equal pay, access to land and social protection. That women's life choices would be unconstrained by gender stereotypes, stigma, and violence, which we heard from Philippe. That gender stereotypes and stigma is also kind of contributing to violence, but also how violence is restraining women's economic empowerment. We know very well, all of us, that we do a lot of unpaid work in our homes, whether it's caring for family members, children, or elderly or sick, but we would like that work to be more respected and valued, and with a more respect and value attached to this kind of care work. Sorry. We believe that the improvements also at the policy level. And that women have equal say in economic decision making, both at the household, in national economies, and for broader economic policies. You probably have, many of the champions and the mentors have heard about the Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Women's Economic Empowerment. We have a dedicated space on empowerwomen.org that you can go to, and we can actually add that link to the slide afterwards before we send it out to you. But we are currently working very closely with the Secretary General's High-Level Panel members. We have set up 7 different groups depending on the key priority areas that were identified at the outset of this panel's work, and where we think that more attention needs to be brought. It started actually off with 6 working groups, and we had one group on eliminating legal barriers to women's economic empowerment, addressing the care economy, reducing gender pay gaps, expanding opportunities for women who work in the informal sector, promoting financial and digital inclusion for women, and also access to other kind of property, and fostering women's entrepreneurship, enhancing the productivity of women-owned enterprises. While these working groups were hard at work, there was a strong feeling that something was missing. So we added a 7th group working on the macroeconomic framework to really frame the economy. Currently, the macroeconomic framework is focusing a lot about growth, economic growth, but it doesn't focus on inclusive growth. What does it mean with inclusive growth? A growth that works for people and the growth that works for women. And so we want to make sure that these policies are actually leading to the generation of decent work. It's not only about increasing the GDP in terms of production. It could be mining with very few people involved, or extraction of oil, for example, with very few employment opportunities because it's being exported right away. It might be about actually trying to foster a domestic economy that creates jobs and creates demand in consumption as well. It's also about what we call fiscal space, or mobilizing resources to fund public services. How can the macroeconomic policies make sure that there is sufficient funds to help its population in funding healthcare, education, care services, whether for children or the elderly, making sure that everybody has water and sanitation, social protection measures, etc., etc. So this group is hard at work to make sure that we have a framework that works for women. But there's always a lot of challenges. It's about economic instability. Climate change has major implications on women farmers and their land, and desertification, for example. Conflict and humanitarian crisis. We knew, for example, a few years ago where a whole society was wiped out by a hurricane, and how that then puts everybody back to ground zero and really have to start off again and building up not only the economic activities but the whole economy as such when everything has been wiped out by humanitarian crisis. We see similar things in conflict-ridden countries where much of the infrastructure has been destroyed and an economy doesn't work effectively if there's no infrastructure. And that women in the labor market and as entrepreneurs, and we know that when we have economic crisis or any other form of crisis, that women are almost culturally called back home to take care of the family and the household and the members of the household. Gender segregated labor markets is a major factor as well. This is how it kind of dictates where women culturally is perceived to be working and should be working. We know, for example, that there's still very much that women should not work in the technology sector, in STEM fields, etc. And this is something that we are hard at work to overcome these challenges because we believe as UN Women that women and men should have equal opportunity to work in whatever sector they'd like without any restrictions. We are running slowly out of time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit, but we also know that limited access to finance, education, training, technology, etc. are also very much major restrictions to women's economic empowerment. We have a resource that we'd like to share for you, for those who would like to read and to dwell a little bit more into depth. We have our Progress of the World's Women, published last year, talks about transforming economies, realizing rights, and this is a great opportunity for you to go into a little bit more detail on these issues that I just talked about. But I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that we asked our community, what is economic empowerment for you? And we wanted to know a little bit more because we come with our position here as UN Women, and we'd always like to hear from all of you. We got some responses. It was a campaign on social media, and some of our members mobilized their children to be part of the campaign. Women's economic empowerment is about equality, or it's about growth. We had responses, more responsible business. It's about access to resources. So we are taking this into account, and I think that it gives a broader view on how complex it is, and that everybody comes in from a little bit their perspective depending on where they work, where they study, and what their backgrounds are and what countries they're from. Very, very briefly, you already know about Empower Women, but just to give you a little bit of a background in terms of how we talk about it. We were launched in 2013 at the high-level segment of the UN General Assembly. As you know, our vision is a world where every woman is able to use her voice, make her own decisions, and engage in economic opportunities. And it's about, our mission is really about how do we inspire women and men, both men, and we heard from Philippe that it's important to have men involved as well, to become advocates, change makers, and leaders in the community, and that we equip you and our other users with resources, opportunities, and a global platform to facilitate networking, learning, and sharing of experiences. Why join? You already joined, so you might already know. So but let's just give you some tools that you can use when you advocate for more of your friends and family and colleagues to join. We think that a good way is actually a personal profile. And if you Google your name, you will see that this profile comes very, very high up. So not only does it give you visibility in the digital space, but it also gives an opportunity for you to put in your bio and to talk a little bit about who you are and to make yourself more visible in case you apply for jobs. We know today every employer will Google you and see where your background is, and this is a good opportunity for you to be visible online. We also have the business profiles where we are collecting stories or the good practices from different organizations, what they do for women's economic empowerment. So this is important for those in the group that work on the business, that to be able to offer this and be able to align it also with our women's empowerment principles. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but you know the women's empowerment principles are 7, and we are going to develop a dedicated space on Empower Women where we go into more detail, where we will post the tools and resources related to how business practices can be more gender responsive. We also have had our campaign. We had the 1-year campaign that we ended about a year ago, where we received stories, over 300 stories from all over the world. You can see them mapped out on the map. We were so excited to hear from so many women and men about their vision about women's economic empowerment. But we also have some ongoing stories, campaigns, Her Story, where we are working with Wikipedia and the Wikimedia Foundation to really bring about more visibility of women who have made a difference. And there's so many women out there that are not being discussed or covered in our formal education system or in our textbooks or in our history books. So this campaign is really about bringing a light to these women scientists, historians, whatever impact they've done. And it could be also somebody in your community that you can contribute their voices. We continue to also work on other stories and blogs, and where we would like to hear from women's own perspectives. And it could be that there is an issue that you'd like to really research more, and you might want to write a story, or you want to encourage some expert in the community to write a story about some emerging topic that you think would be interesting for the whole community. And this is also where we post some of the entrepreneurial stories on iLearn, and it's about the storytelling, and we have also added, for those who have not looked at it recently, the course material. We have 2 courses on the business plan and on marketing for women entrepreneurs who only have a regular feature phone. Available in many different languages, such as Arabic, Bangla, English, French, Hindi, Spanish, and Swahili. I think we're adding Portuguese and some other languages, Diana, as well. Right? Yes. Finally, I'm going to just briefly talk about the newsletter. As you know, you receive it every month. This is an opportunity to contribute. We have added a new segment on the women's empowerment principles to also have some dedicated space for gender responsive business. I'd like to, Philippe had to run off because we ran out of time, but if you have any questions for me or any questions that we can relate to him afterwards, we can include maybe any response in the email that we'll send out afterwards.
Thank you so much, Anna. I mean, this is so helpful for all of us, and especially sorry, for our champions who will start now in February to actually go in the community and implement the project. I know we have our dedicated advisors and mentors who are always over there to help, advise, prepare, guide you, but it's always also nice and useful and you know, important to receive a model of how to present or how to speak about women economic empowerment and the linkages. In this today in particular, we spoke how to speak about women economic empowerment and the linkage with ending violence against women. Because we are out of time, unfortunately we will probably take one question, but I wanted you to know that this presentation will be shared and we will make specific draft presentation or PPT, but you can adjust for your case in particular when you will go in your community, so you have a document where to start. So we will include some language and some important slides that we think you can carry on and make this presentation. So we will share this with the follow-up email. And don't forget about our new campaigns, Has Story and Breakfast Plus, that are always, you know, ongoing and will be ongoing in 2017. And you have an opportunity to share all these beautiful stories, change, either online or offline, and on social media as well. So some of the questions are, how we can find information on macroeconomic and the linkages with maybe women economic empowerment and to be more accessible for champions, and how we can take this information in a very understanding language.
Sorry, can you repeat?
So question on macroeconomic. So how we can link to be very, you know, as a practical point to leaders or the members of community, how we can explain this when they go with their presentation.
Yeah, that's a very tricky question. I think it's macroeconomics so complex in terms of break it down exactly macroeconomic different strands of policies. And I think that it needs to be broken down both in terms of what kind of, are we talking about fiscal policy, are we talking about what are the policies talking about? And then really learn about how does it impact on the labor market, on the availability to because there is the experts, macroeconomic experts within the government often sit in finance, in the finance ministry, and in the economic planning ministry, and in the central bank, of course. But I think that just raising the fact that it needs to be elevated beyond the small-scale initiative or the small-scale programs that the government is doing, that it needs to, the change needs to shift at the global level and the overarching level on how the economy is being managed and for what purpose. How is it working for people? And I think it's it really is very country specific as well on how the current macroeconomic policies have been established. If they are outward looking, we know that a lot of countries are working to export. Trade is very important, whereas other countries are looking inward and trying to generate a local economy that is very, very strong and that can provide employment and that can compete in that way on the strength of its people rather than just for export.
Thank you, Anna. We have a comment from Sheila saying, great to see reps and empowerment connection, more visible, extremely powerful force to change. So we do have excitement from our community about the reps and the development of a new page on that. We do have a question from Caroline, and here together with us, so we do have our colleague from Ending Violence Against Women Section 9 as well, and she will take it over to Philippe, and together I'm sure they can provide a written answer. Philippe touched on various forms of violence and how to deal with specific types. Can you kind of clarify this in the context of Kenya? So maybe some kind of examples, and also Egypt is another one. So we assure you that we take notes of all these questions, and as much as possible we'll get back. Thank you so much for the presentation, Anna, from the community. Another questions are from Kasum, and he is asking, do you have some tools and methodology to measure violence against women in the workplace, home? And again, we will relay these questions to the team. And particular to us, how can at the local level with support of we can get the support of empowerment team and organize high-level panels in our countries? I will give this question to Anna, but another question is how can all women economic empowerment webinars where, on other topics can be in French. Kasum, on this, we will be happy to collaborate, and maybe we can, for all the champions, mentors who have a specific topic and would like to elaborate more on this in their language, so meaning French and Spanish, please share with us the topic and the language, and email this request to empower.women@unwomen.org, and we will be happy to do everything it takes from our turn to make it happen. So please do rely to us with a specific topic and the language. And Anna, on the question on high-level panel and how we can bring the local contributions to attention of a SG high-level panel, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more.
So on the, I think Philippe, maybe we can explore how he can actually do another webinar in French, because he is from France. So thank you, Kasum, for that suggestion. On the high-level panel, its work is actually wrapping up at the end of March. So at this point, it's for the panel work, there's not much that could be inputted as such. However, what we are all working on right now is how do we take these recommendations that have been developed and make sure that we have a sustainable approach of carrying them forward. We have one group that are working on business practices, and we hope that our work on the women's empowerment principles will be the tool to kind of carry it forward, and there will be lots of work that will emerge out of that. The same thing with the group that focus on digital and financial inclusion. Your groups that are working on the skills development will be a very concrete way that you can contribute to the follow-up and to the virtual skills school. So while to the report itself, it's kind of wrapping up, this meeting in Dubai will be a final discussion of the panel members, And then after the Dubai meeting next week, they will finalize the report.
Thank you, Anna. And I know we are way over time, but last question, because it's appearing again and again through the list of questions. How does one address these issues on women economic empowerment, on ending violence against women to women with different cultural and religious values, especially if they had been brought up believing that equality is wrong? And we know cultural bias, it's always over there. It's always a question and a matter of concern when we speak about Agenda 2030 and more specifically on women economic empowerment. And I will, connect with Anna, and Anna can share more at the higher level, policy level. But we always go back to the issue or the status that current economic construction as it is not working for women. And we already know the notion of smart economic, and we already know that all the arguments related with the rights for all women in concern with the adequate pension, the right to health care, water and sanitation, economic policy making. It's always a good way to connect with the cultural aspects and maybe to make it more realistic for people and for peers, for community in general. But of course, Anna can share more on this as well.
Yeah, no, it's a kind of tricky question, but I'd like to bring it up from a different perspective. First of all, the international agreements that are done at the international level is done by the top level officials in a country. So there is already commitment at your national level. For example, the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda has very, very strong elements on ending violence against women, women's economic empowerment. If you really go into, and maybe, Diana, we can add a slide after the fact on the SDGs and some of the targets, you will see in more detail that there has already been an agreement. Your prime minister, your president, your king, or whoever it is that is empowering your country has already agreed by consensus in this. There has been negotiations for over a year on what should be into the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is not for nothing. This is to set that overall framework for implementation in countries. You also have the CEDAW Convention. The CEDAW Convention has been signed and by almost every country in the world, with the exception of the US and Saudi Arabia, and I don't know if there is one more. But in principle, every country in the world has agreed to the text in CEDAW, and maybe we can include that too in terms of the text. The CEDAW committee is reviewing each of the countries' work, what it has done. It asks questions to the government. What have you done to implement the provisions that you agreed to? So that's from kind of the global level, and there are agreements, and there are probably also great provisions in your constitutions and in your national legislation. So it's basically about holding people accountable towards what has been agreed at the international, regional, and national levels. The other one, if you want an argument, and Kasum, by the way, on the data and tools to measure the Sustainable Development Goals do have now a target on ending violence against women. So we can ask Philippe and his team to share that as well. So you have access to what kind of data is being collected under that provision. But the second point that I wanted to make is about money. Money always talks and always makes people more excited to take action if they see that there is savings to be made or money to be made. And as we heard from Philippe's presentation, it is costly to society to have women who are not showing up to school, not learning as much as they could. They are not showing up to work because they have to take, they feel ashamed of going to work with blue marks or any other evidence from violence, or they might not actually feel good about it in general. So there are costs in society to it, and it costs society millions or billions of dollars to have violence against women. So within a company, there are some companies that are taking action for this because their workforce is not productive if they have been facing violence. So there are many different factors that we can bring up, but we could also think about a second webinar on this topic.
Thank you so much, Anna, for comments. Saying thank you and complimenting Anna and Philippe for a great presentation and superb knowledge. This is quote unquote. And in our turn, we do thank you, our champions and mentors, for connecting with us today and for your patience and always active participation. As usually, we will share the follow-up email recording for this webinar and all the links and resources that we spoke about or you requested. With this, we thank you so much for being with us today, and we wish you a good day.
Thank you.